Thank you, Kelly, for your explanation. Right. I'm going to walk you through the team's two mandate. That is assessing adoption readiness across the agencies, covered agencies. So we had DDC inside here. And then the outer of this donut, we have another covered agencies, 5 of them, 6 including DDC. And what are our roles? Our role is to understand how prepared the broader ecosystem is to use BIM and SIM under EO23, and what conditions are needed for successful implementation. And these are the 6 covered agencies. You guys can see it here. There are transportation, sanitation, parks, and everything else. And these agencies have different distinct roles in the city infrastructure environment. So because of that, their needs, their capability, and also their digital maturities are also vary. And our goal was to surface those differences so that BIM and SIM adoption can be tailored to each one of them. I'll hand it over to Ricky.
Thanks, Joan. These slides show how we assess BIM readiness across the agency using these 6 areas, from government and policy procurement until champions and learning networks. At the end of the interview, we asked each of them to give its own score from 0 to 10 for how ready it feels to use BIM more widely. The next slide shows how we rate those numbers. Agencies chose their own number, but we need a shared language, so we grouped the levels into 5, from no awareness to digital by default, similar to the UK and Singapore. With this, we can see where the NYC agencies sit. Here, you can see the number each of them rated themselves. The main message is willingness is high, but capacity is limited. Park is set around 2 out of 10, and the average is 4.5. DEP and DDC is the highest at 6, but we feel that DEP and DDC is actually just below 7 because they use BIM more widely, and some agencies look to them for their references and using their experience to learn from them in using BIM. So everyone is still in the middle part of the scale, not yet in the desired zone. I'll hand back it to Mo to go deeper into our findings.
Thank you. So the second theme across our interviews with the covered agencies was that whereas BIM and SIM are seen as beneficial, they are not interpreted to be critical to operations. 4 out of 6 of the covered agencies that we spoke to cited staffing shortages and hiring freezes as issues of more pertinence at this time. One such interviewee said, and I quote, "I've tried to garner support for more BIM and SIM projects, but with everything going on right now, it's just not top of mind for the organization at this time." Then we have the Executive Order 23, which appears to lack conviction from the perspective of the covered agencies. 5 out of 6 of the covered agencies that we spoke to cited the fact that because Executive Order 23 doesn't necessarily have any legal ramifications, leadership may not feel a strong onus to actually implement the policies. One such interviewee said, "If we don't use these tools, we're not going to get sued." The others shared similar sentiments. Then moving on, there was also the fear of errors in an industry that is historically risk-averse by practice. In an example given to us by an interviewee from DCAS, say we have a 3D rendering of a building. That rendering has an issue that has gone unnoticed. If that rendering is then used to influence an actual design and a wall collapses as a result, that leaves that agency liable financially and perhaps legally if people get injured. The construction industry has to be risk-averse by design to avoid these issues because the consequences of getting change wrong are incredibly steep. Then we have the dichotomy between new staff and legacy staff. New staff, on one hand, may benefit from an educational background that mandated and ingrained the use of these tools in their learning curve. Whereas with legacy staff, they may have gotten into the industry before these tools were even revised. Therefore, some of them may not feel the need to change how they work because what they've been doing up until this point, according to them, is efficient. And so that creates a dichotomy. But I would like to stress that it's not all legacy stuff. But what is important to note is that if the people who hold senior positions have a reluctance to change, it makes change across the organization very difficult. Then we used the ADCAR model as referenced by my colleague Catherine at the beginning, but here we were looking at the impediments to change. So with awareness, there appears to be the lack of a strong enough why from the perspective of the covered agencies. Then the desire is impeded by the cultural dichotomy that I've just talked about. With knowledge, there's a chasm between who is trained and who isn't. As for ability, that's affected by staffing shortages and hiring freezes. And then the reinforcement of this practice is also impeded upon by the budget cuts that were cited several times, but also the pragmatic and the risk-averse nature of this specific industry. With that, I will pass it back to Ricky to continue.
Thanks again, Mu. I'll tell about a good practice in using BIM in private sector. Based on our interview, they use BIM from early design through construction to operation, and they use one federated model for coordination. The model has rich data asset, not just a 3D model, and client requirement drive model depth. But this practice are close to what the UK and Singapore have done, and they are already doable in New York City private sector. So we believe it is realistic for NYC public institution as well, if we create the right conditions. On the next slide, I'll talk about what makes the level of BIM actually works inside those firms. First, the clear roles and responsibility. Second is share standards and libraries. And third, simple coordination routines like regular model reviews. So BIM is part of weekly rhythm and not just an extra task. Finally, these things, those pattern into practical step. First is treat the model as a project memory, not just a drawing set. Second, clear model leads even on pilot. Start with pain point where it hurt the most, like carbon reporting maybe. Let simple standard grow out of those pilots, like naming rules on templates, and protect time and psychological safety so everyone can learn new tool without fear of being blamed. We believe this move can shift the agency from the middle of our readiness scale closer to the best practice zone we see in the UK and Singapore. I'll hand it over to Joanne for more detailed solutions.
Thank you. So we're coming up to the solutions. So what is our solution? It is a phased, low-risk pilot approach. This will work because of what? Because it minimizes risk by using past project, their own project. So they are familiar with it. They know how it will turn out, so that they will just change the tools. It will just use the BIM. And then it allows agencies to test workflows. Like they can play with it, they can explore it, they can experiment with it just before committing to the resources. So that's money saved. And then give staff time to learn and practice without operational pressure. So there's no due date, there is no whatever it is, because this phase will not build in a tight phase, but it's a long one because they need to practice and learn. And then it creates measurable evidence, the proof that the time is saved, that the cooperation is like improved, so that they feel the benefits of it. And then what are the elements of the pilot projects? There will be the people and then the processes. We have the change leader and source motivated trainees. What are they? So the change leader, so we found that in the interview that every agency has already had at least one change leader. What is change leader? There are the people that are already advanced in BIM. So they actually have one. So that they will be the change leader that will supervise the other motivated trainee. And the motivated trainee, how can they be motivated? So we cannot rely on bonuses and incentives in agency, but we can provide them the clear pathway to professional work. So it's a beneficial one. And then we have the shadow support model and 360 feedback and KPIs. Those are, so the new trainees will be paired with the change leader, so they create the bonding and know what is needed for this new trainee to be excel in the BIM. And then 360 feedback and KPI, so that is a two-way communications, not one-way communication. And then these are the examples that we got from the interview from sanitation. So they say, these are the two distinct benefits that we can get from the project. One, digital repository, and then scans BIM for old facilities. So what they say was, Large volume of historical facility drawings remain in paper and blueprint and stored in archives. So we need to put them into the BIM, like they can learn to do that. And then also they say that sometimes the pipes are 100 years old. Nobody has the information about that. And this will, lessen the time to look for them, to look for the information for if there is an emergency happen in sanitation, things like that. And then I will hand it over to Mu for the value proposition.
Thank you. Now, I know it's been a long presentation. You've had lunch, so you're probably tired. But for this section, if you could kindly lend me your imagination for just the next 2.5 minutes, I will whisk you away from the bustling streets of New York City as we travel across the vast Atlantic to the sweeping vistas of Switzerland, more specifically, the city of Geneva, to a time before BIM, where the models had there were fragmented maps, and the utility maps were also very old. This would mean that when the excavation teams were digging underground, they didn't have a way to assess the situation beforehand, and that would lead to them cutting cables, bursting pipes. That then increases the project costs and also increases the delivery window by weeks, if not months. What did they do? Well, when the industry in Switzerland needed a hero, in came the Federal Council's digital transformation plan that mandated the use of BIM and SIM in process, in design, in operation, and in delivery. What was the result? Well, $50 million saved across the first 5 years, and that is just one use case, not to mention all the other use cases. Switzerland today is now a leader in the adoption of these tools. What does that mean for New York? Well, let's come across back to New York City across the Atlantic. Change is difficult. That much is very clear. We've heard it from the different agencies, the different interviewees. But what is also clear is that change is the only constant in life. Therefore, you cannot resist change by trying to avoid it. You must learn to move with its ebbs and flows. And with those figures over there, I'd like you to imagine what each of these covered agencies could do if they could operate on this level of efficiency. Imagine what DOT or DSNY could do with saving $50 million, $60 million, $70 million across their projects. The possibilities are endless. So we believe that New York City should not be fretted by the challenges in the short term when the prospects of long-term prosperity are so great. New York has always been the city that moves forward. That's what draws us here. It is the zeal, the willingness, the can-do attitude that makes it great. The feeling of possibility that is rooted at the bedrock of every block and every borough from Brooklyn to Queens, from Manhattan up to the Bronx. BIM and SIM offer new possibilities, and that is what can help make what is already the best city in the world that much better. With that, I will hand it over to Bear to conclude our presentation.
So at its core, Executive Order 23 sets an ambitious sustainability mandate for New York, focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions across capital projects. So ultimately, yet our interviews consistently revealed a structural gap. So EO 23 defines what must be achieved, but not how. And the theme that came across every interview was that a well-designed BIM pilot is essential. They create a real evidence, as Mu and Kelly pointed out, reduce uncertainty, as Joanna and Ricky detailed, and help teams understand how BIM can support the EO23's sustainability costs and delivery goals in practice. Our findings show that BIM integration directly supports risk management throughout the full project's life cycle, adopts this information model, as we have seen, and has shown the ability to accelerate the city's ability to transform into a building environment. Ultimately, the goal is not simply to expand BIM as a mandate, but to make it trusted, usable, and scalable across DDC and the other covered agencies as New York advances towards a digital and enhanced sustainable future. Thank you.